Hello, this is one of my games from the final round of the 7-Point Highlander Winner Mocks event on Magic Online. So we're playing essentially for top 8. I believe some number of X2s will make the top 8, but given breakers, I really do need to win both games. So this is a cool match against a graveyard-centric deck, but not really all in on the dredge plan. As always, the deck list goes in the description, but this deck wants to play to the board with stuff like Vengevine and some cool dorks like Birds of Paradise, Stitches Supplier, etc. But it also has a pretty potent graveyard synergy going. It's playing Anger. It's a bit of a survival deck where it wants to chain things together and then put Hogak, Vengevine, etc. into play, and you can't beat those things. So I made a couple of small changes to my deck list and sideboard. Modern Horizons 2 brought a monkey that everybody has proceeded to buy from the bots on Magic Online, and it took me a while to find one. So this was the hand I had in game 1, and it's I'm on the fence here about keeping it, but I don't think it's too feasible to think you can just keep mulliganing for Blood Moon plus mana acceleration to put into play a turn earlier. Notably, my opponent's deck is very weak to Blood Moon effects. They don't play any basics, and they don't have a lot of cards that can get out from under a Blood Moon. So in game 1, they have 0 outs to it, and in game 2, they have a single Force of Vigor. I tanked a little bit on this hand, but I did think, you have 2 very potent threats here. This attacks for turn 1 on turn 1, you attack for 3 on turn 2, then you play Dak Faden and you attack for 1, 2, 3, 4 on turn 3. Like, it's a not unreasonable clock. Dak can steal an artifact if they have a nice draw with a hollow one or something. It gives you a little bit of insurance against that, and it can then go find you cards. I don't think Grim Lavamancer is doing too much here, but Mishra's Factory is an extra couple points of damage somewhere along the line. I was really on the fence about this hand. And I've certainly advocated mulliganing hands like this in the past, where you just sort of have a 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, and you don't really do a whole lot. It's possible it was a borderline keep. I just think, although it's definitely not in the category of good 7-card hands I want against this deck, I don't think mulliganing necessarily offers me more. My opponent's on the play. They have a very good turn 1 of crop rotation into Bazaar of Baghdad. They ship some cards. I have to click a little bit more on the replay. So they ship Anger and Hogak. So that's immediately a little worrying. Anger's a scary card in general. When it's in the graveyard, suddenly they can now put a lot of damage very fast. And Hogak comes in like, my deck doesn't have an answer to Hogak. My answer to Hogak is to kill my opponent before it can come into play. There's no Swords to Plowshares or Vapor Snag or things that can actually deal with this. Alright, so they're doing some things. Their deck's doing the Bazaar of Baghdad thing, and I rip Mox Ruby. So now I have an interesting decision. Do I play Sprite Dragon on 1? Do I play Swift Spear and pump it with the Mox Ruby and get in for 2 and then play Lavamancer? Or do I play, say, Swift Spear off the red source and then next turn try and Sprite Dragon, grow it to 2, play Lavamancer, which I think is much worse. I think you want to spend all your mana this turn and then play Dak or something like that next turn. I elected to just put Sprite Dragon into play. I think it gives a bit of flexibility to next turn, either Dak Faden if you need to, because you have to dig for something, or you can still do something like a Swift Spear plus Lavamancer, plus maybe play a 1-drop if you play it, something like that. And this card is also much more likely to keep getting in for damage, whereas Swift Spear, it's quite feasibly going to be walled off. My opponent, unfortunately, has an excellent turn 2. I remember this, right? Yeah, so they discard Basking Rootwaller and its new cousin, which is pretty good for these decks. This is from Modern Horizons. My opponent got a lot of cards from Modern Horizons. You can see that they are looking at recasting Hogak very soon. They just need one other black or green creature, and if they have a land drop and a 1-drop, they can do that. So they shock themselves, play Deathwatch Shaman, and the math here is particularly gross because they don't even have to. I originally thought, cool, 7 mana, they got to bin 5 cards from the graveyard, so they'll bin all their cards. I forgot they can convoke it with Blazing Root Waller, so they can keep Anger in the bin, and then there's just a very angry, hasty 8/8 Trampler on turn 2, which was a lot of fun for me to see, and I think I played an extra couple of turns here just for the sake of it, but really, I'm dead here. There are no particular outs I can draw. I sort of was like, I could like Fire Blast into Price of Progress to try and draw the game with some other burn spells, something like that, but I just played some Dorks and hoped that I brainstorm into the exact perfect cards I needed or something like that, but yeah, very dead. This card is cool. It fits very nicely in my opponent's deck, and it gets the cookbook. What's it called? The Underworld Cookbook. And this card's actually particularly good against my deck. Not only is it a discard enabler, but the food tokens that it makes every turn are actually quite relevant against aggro. So this is another nice little pickup from Modern Horizons for a deck that has cool synergies with the graveyard, but also suddenly has a bit of play to beating stuff. And now this is lethal, so I go ahead and scoop it up. They wasteland me for some reason. I'm already dead. Maybe they know I can't be playing Simian Spirit Guide, so the game's over, which was unfortunate. My opponent had a very good draw, and our sort of good but not great hand couldn't keep up. So onto game 2, I sideboarded very selectively. So I brought in Submerge, Mental Misstep, Relic of Progenitus, and Tormod's Crypt. I didn't bring in Grafdigger's Cage. I had a look through my opponent's deck list quite carefully before the match, and a lot of the things they're doing don't actually get turned off by Grafdigger's Cage. It turns off a few cards, like obviously Vengevine, etc., but Hogak would be the other notable one. But the Root Wallers certainly don't need to be cast from the graveyards. They're still free cards. My opponent generates value and then casts big Delve creatures quite cheaply, and that obviously, I think I had Tasiga, Gomag Angler, and Tarmogoyf, and those obviously aren't going to be affected by either of those cards. Sorry, by Grafdigger's Cage, but they are affected by the 2 I brought in. So I was quite mindful that I needed to aggressively target the graveyard. And then I cut some of the slower, dorkier cards that don't do anything. So I cut a Narset, I cut Jacephrin's Prodigy. I took out Skewer the Critics, and then I was tanking on whether I should remove Sulfuric Vortex or Wheel of Fortune. And I decided Sulfuric Vortex was just too important to leave in, even though it was potentially not going to be good if I drew it. Just because they have Gnaw to the Bone in their board, and that's certainly a card that I'm never ever beating. If it gains them 5, there are 5 creatures in the bin, that's not unreasonable. I can't beat that much life, especially when they flash it back. And Wheel of Fortune, I'm a little cautious about having them dump their hand into the bin. So this was a hand I was looking at, and again, doesn't have Acceleration, doesn't have a Blood Moon, which is the card I most want against my opponent because they really can't do much with it in play. This hand is again sort of really good, but I'm playing against a graveyardy, dredgy deck, and I'm not good. Like Koth is a bit whatever. Lightning Bolts, if they have Birds of Paradise, fantastic, and if they don't, is much worse. And Vortex, as we just discussed, is sort of a double-edged sword. But I kept this hand. I think it's certainly good enough to keep. I think I should have led on Mountain. I lead on Spirebluff Canal, I think. Yeah. Because my opponent plays both Wasteland and Strip Mine. So I want to make sure I can stick Eidolon on turn 2 rather than potentially letting them Wasteland me and hold me up. So nothing too remarkable happens. Our opponent plays a Cookbook, which is pretty good. It starts the graveyard engine going. It starts making some foods. You can potentially, buy multiple turns with this thing. And if you didn't read the text for, its final ability is to unearth something back to your hand. The card that goes to get this, Asmore, with a very long name that I can't remember off the top of my head. The card that goes to get this also has the text, sacrifice 2 foods, destroy target creature, or target creature does 6 or 8 damage to itself. So there's quite a potent synergy against creature decks that these cards offer. Not here though. Here my opponent's going to be under quite a lot of pressure quite quickly. So I do Chrome Mox, and here I'm tanking on whether I play Eidolon or I go straight for Sulfuric Vortex. Not a fan of sticking Vortex straight away. Yes, I get to pump this twice with the Mox and then the Vortex, so I ship for 3 damage total. But they're going to cast multiple spells that are going to trigger Eidolon next turn. Or obviously, if I play it, they may decide not to cast them. But this by itself is not doing a whole lot. They're going to need to cast some other things, Faithless Looting, stuff like that, to really get their engine going. So I went for the Eidolon play. There is maybe a decision on whether to play Chrome Mox now. You put Koth under it, you get to save yourself 2 points of damage because you don't play it with Eidolon in play, and you get to lock in the extra point of damage here, whereas they may play a blocker. I thought about it a little bit, but I don't really want to put one of these cards underneath it. I definitely want to keep Vortex, and I definitely want to keep Lightning Bolt, because they could well have a creature I need to remove, and I probably want to play this card given the way the game has gone so far. So I have to put Koth under it, and I don't really want to put Koth under it because I might want to attack for an extra 4 damage with Koth. So I decided there wasn't actually a good reason to play Chrome Mox here. There's too much that my opponent could do that changes the value of these cards in my hand dramatically. End step, my opponent flips Hogak for a food, which is pretty standard. That card certainly does nothing in their hand. And they play a Foothills, they fetch, and they make a Hedron Crab. And at this point I was pretty happy. They've taken 2 damage from this, Lightning Bolt's going to kill it, they're going to get the full damage next turn from these things swinging in. If they're playing it on turn 2, they're being forced to essentially take a turn off for the possibility of filling their graveyard up a bit later. I was kind of mindful that, Hogak is difficult to cast without 2 things in play, but that could change relatively quickly. In my end step, they put in a Root Waller, they untap, they play a Root Waller, suddenly there's an 8/8 in play, and I can't get in for damage anymore. So I draw Steam Vents, and this is a decision about, do you play Vortex, Koth, or Bolt? The upside of bolting is you get to play a tap Steam Vents, and then you can not take the 2 damage to cast one of these spells. I think killing this is probably essential. I don't think you really want to let it live. You just milling 6 cards just lets your opponent get their engine started from a situation where otherwise they don't have a lot. So I just attacked. I think it's unlikely your opponent blocks with Hedron Crab, but certainly if they do, I'll more than happily bolt their face instead. They don't, so in combat I kill Crab to maximize Swiftspear's damage, and then I'm going to play its tap Steam Vents and pass. This is a spot where playing Sulfuric Vortex is probably not terrible, but I think you're just a little bit shy on the damage front. If you played it, they may well have chumped with Hedron Crab to save an extra turn's damage, but if I'd played it, they're at 10 life, I've got Bolt, so they're at 8, they're at 5, they get 2 extra turns, whereas this way I can potentially threaten to make this their last turn, where they're facing down 3, 4, 5, 6 damage, so a burn spell that I rip could kill them with a Chrome Mox to power it out. So my opponent continues doing the food thing, and the other note, is I'm actually not too concerned about the foods in this situation. I'm so far ahead on board that if my opponent takes essentially an entire turn to pay all their mana to gain 3 life, I'm very okay with that. The damage output here races that quite effectively when I've got cards like this in my hand. The second thing is, I guess, like Vortex, is going to turn these off in a sec. So we get Wastelanded, which is as expected. If they're going to play the Wasteland, I read this as they don't have another land in their hand, because I think they would have wanted to play a land and play more spells rather than Wasteland when they're behind on board. But again, they have to play Death by Shaman, they have to take damage from it, it cuts them off activating a food, so they're spending their mana inefficiently, and this is just generally a rough spot for my opponent. especially because they can try and gain life with this, but it's not particularly fast. They've already got a much more efficient life gain engine in play. And then we have Chain Lightning, and there's a decision here. Do you Chain Lightning the Deathrite Shaman, which makes this into 4 damage, you can play the Chrome Mox to make it into 5 damage, and you can serve for 5 to put them to 3. Do you play the Chrome Mox, put Koth under it, and then you can play Vortex or just attack, so you can threaten to put them to 4, and then play Vortex and have them at 2, or you can play Vortex first. If you play Vortex first, they go to 1. You can Chain Lightning your opponent's face, but then if you Chain Lightning your opponent's face, you can't play either of these 2 cards, so I don't think that's particularly good. The line I was taking on was kill Deathrite Shaman with Chain Lightning, and then serve for a bunch of damage, but I thought that's just a little bit worse because I can't lock them out of gaining life, and they might have the ability to gain some life. They've started to fill their graveyard up a little bit, play something like a Gurmag Angler or similar. It's very close. I think, the line I took was just Yam Vortex, but I could certainly see the argument for shooting Deathrite Shaman and just serving for 4. I don't think they have Gurmag Angler in their hand, or they would have cast it last turn, but I can certainly see a world in which they draw it, and then, I can't attack, and playing Vortex is something a little risky because they've got a 5/5, they might turn the corner a little too quickly. But either way, I think it's all pretty close. This is obviously a very good spot to be in. My opponent doesn't chump block, they just go to 1, which is probably the best line. I don't think chump blocking with Deathrite Shaman... Sorry, they just go to 3. I think chump blocking with Deathrite Shaman is going to do anything. They get 1 spell under the Eidolon, and that's it. So I messed up the math again. They go to 1 ultimately, but chumping with Deathrite Shaman does actually get them an extra spell, so maybe they do want to do that. But regardless, they concede. I think it's just a rough spot to be in. I don't think the difference between Vortex and Lightning is particularly great, but certainly, if you think I should have just shot the Deathrite Shaman, I'd be quite interested in hearing about it. So those 2 games were relatively one-sided. Then we settled in for a very, very fun game 3. I didn't change anything about my sideboard, and I looked at this opening hand on the draw. And it's quite an opening hand. It's got, it's got Magoose and Blood Moon, which are, I think, the best 2 cards in your deck against your opponent. And it's got Time Twister, which undoes all their graveyard engine shenanigans before you reset the game. So I thought a little bit about this. This hand doesn't do anything until turn 3 on the draw, so it's not particularly great. But, turn 3 on the draw, you get to Blood Moon them, and then the next turn you get to Time Twister and Fire Blast. Sort of, if they've put something into play that needs to be killed, you can kill it. It'll kill a Tarmogoyf 100% of the time because of Time Twister's effect. It'll deal with most of the things that they could be threatening me with. So I decided to keep, just because the impact of these cards is potentially really high. My opponent once again has a cookbook on turn 1, so their engine is coming together quite quickly. I rip a land, I play Flutterstrand in case I get wastelanded. I want to minimize my exposure to that. And then Vengefang goes to the bin, and I'm like, oh dear, if my opponent just plays Mana Dork, 2 1-drops, or discards a Root Wallet of this and plays a 2-drop or just any other 1-drop, whatever, I'm actually just dead. I definitely can't beat this card coming into play next turn. So, I was crossing my fingers quite hard for that. Fortunately, it didn't happen. Otherwise, this wouldn't have been a very interesting game. But they did put Anger in their bin, which also really scared me. And then they played Asmora, this card, the very long name. So they've got a 3/3 that kills my blockers, because it's got sack 2 foods, target creature deals 6 damage to itself, and it's got haste. And I was a little worried by this, but at the same time I was thinking, look, I've got quite a lot of cards in my deck that kill it. Sure, I can get a couple of hits in before I Twister, but I'll draw a Bolt at some point. My opponent's deck isn't really an aggro deck. It's sort of a grindy, not really a mid-range deck, but it's a grindy aggro deck that wants to just have recursive threats rather than overwhelm me with threats. I fetch Basic Island because I need it to function under Blood Moon, which does mean that Fire Blast is unfortunately an extra turn away if I sort of had to cast it desperation-wise. I need to play Swift Spear, and I don't attack here because I don't think the 1 damage is going to matter that much. Like, there's a lot of food here. I'm probably not going to chump this, but I'm certainly going to consider chumping if my opponent attacks with Vengevine, for example. This one, this has haste anyway, so it doesn't need the anger in the bin, but I would certainly consider chumping to preserve my life total, to try and play Magus of the Moon, and then they can't do anything. Maybe I can try and chump again if I'm absolutely desperate. So for 3, I wear it, and then Elvish Reclaimer turns up, which again I was a little bit irritated by because it's if it was just a 1/2 I'd be fine with it, but this thing under Blood Moon still gets quite large. They can bin cards to Cookbook, and I've got 2-3 power threats I've got to deal with. So I was a little, not sad. I knew what I was doing and I kept the hand. I was a little, well, I think I might have outplayed myself in this spot. I'm taking 6 damage potentially next turn. If not 6, I'm definitely taking 4. My opponent's got me in a pretty awkward spot. And I considered playing Magus of the Moon here, because at least Magus of the Moon threatens to, eat the Elvish Reclaimer if they don't happen to be able to put 2 cards in the bin. But my opponent has Lightning Axe in their sideboard, and if I play Magus and he gets Lightning Axed in my end step, or on my opponent's turn, then I think the game is just over. Because my next turn will be Time Twister when I'm well behind on board, or play a Blood Moon and don't add to the board. I think that's definitely losing. Whereas Blood Moon, sure, they could have Force of Vigor plus green card, but if they do, they do, and at least they then don't have the ability to really crack in for too much damage. Whereas if I play Magus and they kill it with Lightning Axe, it's so bad. So I have to take a point of damage to cast this, which is a little frustrating. But I cast the Moon. Again, I choose not to attack, because I'm seriously considering chumping the Asmora, that card. Let's call it Asmore. I think that's probably the convention at this point. I'm almost certainly going to chump Asmore. And then it turns out my opponent did actually have Lightning Axe, which, good thing I didn't play the Magus. They've been Ox, which I was like, wow, if they can find a way to, unearth, escape this next turn, that's very good. I didn't think they'd have too many ways to do it. Faithless Looting doesn't quite do it because they need an extra mana source, but, this card's one of their best cards to have whilst locked under Blood Moon. Anyway, I take 4, go to 8, and I'm now in a spot where it's sort of, quite precarious. My best line is going to be the Time Twister, but my opponent has 1 card in hand. Time Twister's pretty good for them. So, rip Foothills, and there isn't really much of an option here. You can't play Eidolon when you're at 8 life. You're never going to be able to get out from underneath it. Your opponent's got a bunch of food, so they don't actually care about being stuck underneath it. The line here that I decided on was Time Twister, and in response, Fire Blast to kill Asmore, and that way I'm only taking 1 damage a turn for a while, so that at least buys me some time. I did the sequencing a little poorly. I Fire Blasted first. That's fine. Then I Time Twisted. And my opponent bins their Force of Vigor in response, which I thought was amusing. And where's our new hand? New hand, please. Yeah. And this hand, again, is not particularly good. You know, kind of sucks, but Rift Bolt's going to kill this thing. And then Swift Spear and Guide are going to crack in for some damage. You know, our opponent's functionally locked under Blood Moon unless they can draw Force of Vigor plus green card. And they have no deck manipulation to do it with because, you know, Faithless Looting, I think, is their only card that they can cast. Faithless Looting and Lightning Axe are probably the only two cards they can cast locked under Blood Moon. So I was thinking, like, hey, this is actually going to be quite fine. So I suspend the Rift Bolt with the plan of killing this next turn. I was thinking I'd be fine because, you know, they've got to get multiple cards. They've got to get 3 lands into the graveyard in order to have this survive Rift Bolt. So at this point I was actually thinking, you know, not the best 7, but had some lands. I had to sack a couple to 5 last, had the answer, and now we play the prison deck type strategy for a while. So opponent gained some life with the food. Excellent. And then they did the combo where they get Dark Depths, which now if Blood Moon goes away, I lose on the spot because this turns into just a straight up 20/20. And then they got to discard a land to their hand size, which is something I didn't actually realize. And now it sucks because I can't point Rift Bolt at this thing. They can discard a card to undo a cookbook. There are 3 lands in the bin. This survives, and I'm like, you know, turns out my 7 was worse than I thought it was. I had to point the Rift Bolt at my opponent's face. I don't think pointing at Elvish Reclaimer really does anything. You know, there's maybe an argument for just forcing them to have a land, but like I don't think they skip their land drop in this spot just to bluff that they have a land in hand when I've already, you know, been forced to cast a Rift Bolt. So I just, you know, thought, look, I'll shoot their face. It trades for the food, but you know, this isn't great. I play the only 2 spells in my hand, as you might expect. And I decided to attack because this is going to be a 3/4 next turn, and you know, a 2/2 and a 1/2 don't profitably block a 3/4. And there's no single blue spell in my deck that I would realistically cast here, so my opponent can attack pretty freely. I guess Brainstorm is the only spell I can cast, but I can't bluff like a burn spell or a lightning bolt or something like that. So I serve and just accept that, you know, I'm definitely not chumping. I'm just going to 5 and I have to live with my opponent getting to grow it. So they indeed do flip a land, make some food. And at this point I, you know, reluctantly was sort of emotionally accepting that I was probably not going to win this game. Their threat beats my threats. Their food beats my entire deck at this point, and they have the out of, at any point, if they rip Force of Vigor, this goes away, and I lose to Merit Large. So they send, I, you know, draw a land, and I have to, you know, tank before attacking, or, you know, before faking the attack, to make my opponent maybe think I've got a burn spell that I just, you know, I'm holding to kill this if it attacks me. And even worse, they get to assemble a Blazing Root Waller. So now I was very disappointed with how this had turned out. But leaving these back with 4 mana up is apparently actually quite threatening. So where do we go? Yeah, so my opponent goes to combat and then chooses not to attack with either. And I think this is wrong. You might choose not to attack with Reclaimer because you think, okay, my opponent could have a Lightning Bolt or some other burn spell, so then, you know, they're going to put these 2 in front of it and shoot it, and I can trade for one of them but not both, etc. But I think you should absolutely be attacking with Root Waller here. Even if you want to take a conservative line, this is, you know, like, this has to be blocked. I can't just take 3 damage from it. So it's always trading for one of these cards, and then you can attack with Reclaimer next turn. So my opponent gave me, you know, like an extra card in play here, I think. Obviously, I don't know their hand. They could have been planning to do something with this. But, you know, I was quite happy. And then I had to spend the next turn again, like, going to the attack step, thinking for 2 or 3 seconds, and then shipping the turn, and tanking my opponent's end step as if I had a Lightning Bolt or similar that I was thinking about using but needed to hold for the prowess trigger. Yeah, I don't know if that actually influence my opponent's thinking, but I've got 5 lands in play and 4 lands in my hand, which is, quite a lot of lands, and my opponent's got an engine that's removing lands from their deck and putting them into play, and is gaining a whole lot of life, so I was not terribly optimistic about my chances of winning. They've got 12 extra life that they can gain if they need to over a couple of turns, but they're already still at 20 life. Amusingly, they have the combo here, just naturally. Again, they don't attack. So these turns really, were not terribly interesting. I continue to draw lands. I continue to play lands. Mishra's Factory, if Blood Moon goes away, at least sort of lets me chump block for a turn. I don't know. It's all very bad from this situation. My opponent gains some life, takes some more cards out of their library, so their draw steps are getting significantly better, whilst they continue to have me dead to Force of Vigor at any point in time. So I draw Mental Misstep, which is basically a land in this situation, although I can cast it without paying life, so you have to be grateful for small mercies. But yes, my draw steps post Time Twister have been all lands or blanks, which I was not super happy about. Cool, my opponent again, none of the lands they can get do anything here. They're really just gaining life and thinning their deck every turn, which is a pretty good strategy, to be honest. You can see the cards they've been, Dark Blast, Gnaw to the Bone is a pretty big smash hit, but they can never cast it under Blood Moon. Life from the Loam again, these are not cards they're going to be dredging, they need to rip the Answer to Moon. So cool, we keep sitting here, which I'm eternally grateful for. This standoff is far better for me than my opponent. And I think it's actually quite reasonable that my opponent deduces I actually probably don't have a burn spell, or I would probably have done something. I might have killed Root Waller, or I might have, stitched 2 together to kill Reclaimer. But either way, I'm very grateful I got to draw extra cards to get to this spot. And then Submerge, because my opponent is continuing to Reclaimer. I have a kind of a neat interaction here where I can submerge Elvish Reclaimer in response to its own ability. And then at least, they can't thin their deck anymore, they can't stop stripping dead draws out, and I'm not, dead to a removal spell at a moment's notice. So I go ahead and do that in response, which, works out. This is another Modern Horizons 2 card, which I think is very, very good. It's, the Green Urborg. So again, lands go to the bin. Food gets eaten. My opponent skips their turn. Just passes through their turn. So I get to untap, and I draw Lava Man, which I'm going to play. I serve with Goblin Guide here because I figure I've got 2 blockers now that trade with Blazing Root Waller, and I need to start getting in damage at some point. My deck only wins by dealing 20, 28, 40, 43 points of damage to my opponent. I don't think I can afford to just pass up damage, because every turn, every extra draw step my opponent gets is a shot at winning the game by blowing up Blood Moon. Sadly, my opponent has so many turns here because they have so much food in play. They do decide to attack with the Root Waller, and I'm more than happy to trade Monastery of Swiftspear for it. Happy. I'm not super happy about it, but this thing's not getting pumped anytime soon. Lava Mancer at least kills a creature they play if they happen to have something like an Anger, which was the card I was thinking about when I decided which creature to block with. And then I drew another land. So now I was thinking, okay, well, do I attack with one or both? And I actually decided to attack with both. I was pretty sure they didn't have Anger in hand, because otherwise they would have put it into play at some point. And then Goblin Guide flipped it off the top of my opponent's deck, and I was like, great. My thought process was, maybe I should just left this up in case they drew Anger, but I was thinking that's going to cost me, 5 points of damage, say, over the course of 5 turns I could have attacked with it. Notably, I don't play a land here, which is definitely a mistake. I need to play all my lands. I think, cost myself 5 points of damage with Grim Lava Mance was something I didn't want to do, but I probably could have gotten away with, accepting that it was very unlikely that sort of damage was going to matter. Anger putting me to 3 is a bit frustrating. So they obviously are going to ship with the Anger. Yeah, and then I got Chandra. So this is now quite an interesting spot, and the reason why playing Fiery Eye not playing a land last turn punished me, because there's a really interesting decision here to make with Chandra. So I can flashback Time Twister, or I can, do what? Like, kill this, attack for 4, wait and see what happens. I tanked on this for quite a long time, I think, in the game. So casting Time Twister gives my opponent 7 looks at Force of Vigor, which obviously wins on the spot. But if I don't cast Time Twister, if I just kill this, serve for 4, and then I have to sort of leave Grim Lava Mance back every turn in case they draw Hollow One. So I'm serving for 4 damage per turn. They're gaining 3 life a turn with this engine here, and that gives them 29 turns. They've got multiple extra food, so really it's giving them basically infinite time. So it's saying I'm going to draw, by not casting Chandra, I'm saying I'm going to draw enough relevant threats from my deck before you can draw Force of Vigor. And I don't know, they've got, they're about 3% per turn to draw their Force of Vigor, and I have a lot of bad draws left in my deck. Despite this happening, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, I've still got 10 lands or 11 lands left. I've still got cards like Chrome Mox, Mox Sapphire, Mox Ruby, so those are obviously blanks. I've got a lot of cards that functionally don't do anything, so basically every burn spell doesn't do anything. Because it takes 1 turn off the clock, it doesn't snowball. There are a few cards that are phenomenal for me to draw, like Goblin Rabblemaster, Legion War Boss, cards that get out of hand very quickly. But I was just concerned that, sure, I might lose on the spot if I Time Twister, but I'm not convinced that I am going to outdraw my opponent, because I don't win on the spot if I draw Rabblemaster. It is very good. It's probably the best draw. Maybe Koth is a slightly better draw. You'd have to do the math. I suspect Rabblemaster's probably better. Like, sure, Rabblemaster's phenomenal, but it still gives my opponent many, many turns. Also, I like casting Time Twister. So you have to kill Anger first, obviously, before you shuffle your graveyard back, otherwise you definitely can't do it afterwards. So that's what I did. I Time Twisted. I was like, well, if I'm dead, I'm dead. I'm actually not sure of the correct play. I thought out a little bit, and I might talk to a couple of people about it. If you have a strong thought about it, I think this is probably like a really interesting discussion. Someone can do the math, obviously, on like what the exact percentage chances are, but drawing 7 cards just is very good for me. If my opponent doesn't kill me, I have a much higher chance of hitting something that wins the game. And here, this hand is pretty good. Vortex is obviously unplayable, and Eidolon's obviously unplayable, but this is the sort of card that I was looking for. It actually just shuts down my opponent's turns pretty effectively, because it's a big, angry 4-power beat stick. I don't know why I tap on tap there a few times. I think I wanted to attack with Goblin Guide first, maybe, to see exactly what my opponent was going to draw. Don't know. Whatever. Maybe I was thinking about whether I should dash Ragavan or not. But regardless, I play Ragavan. And I should have played Relic here, but maybe I misclicked and just went through the priority pass. But yeah, my opponent then is Faithless Luna. I was like, ooh, dear, that's a problem. That looks at 4 more cards. Fortunately, you know, they didn't find their Force of Vigor to kill me. And I was like, yeah, probably dodged another bullet here. The game certainly is, you know, about to end relatively quickly. They have Lightning Axe for Ragavan, which means that they no longer have an out to Magoose of the Moon. So if I ever draw Magoose of the Moon, then it turns Force of Vigor off as an out. But yeah, in this spot I was like, cool, they haven't killed me, I'm not dead, I got a bunch of power to put into play, things seem good. Then I do rip the Magoose of the Moon. I was like, oh, excellent, now like, you know, I've been rewarded for taking such a large risk. So Magoose resolves, and now my opponent I think actually is on 0 outs. And this game becomes very uninteresting very quickly. The reason I didn't make 2 1-1s with Chandra here was I wanted to put a loyalty counter on her so that in the future I could flash back a burn spell without killing her. I'm not sure if that particularly matters, but that was my thinking. My opponent proceeds to eat food, and the rest of this game is really very uninteresting. I have assembled a motley crew of idiots, and my opponent isn't allowed to cast spells anymore. So I just attack multiple times. My opponent messaged me and we just had a brief chat about like whether you kill Ragavan with Lightning Axe or hold it for Magoose of the Moon, because obviously it's your 1 out against Magoose. But I don't think you can let Ragavan hit you. Ragavan could just steal, you know, Hollow One, Tarmogoyf, Gomag Angler, Tasiga, like any big dumb thing that forces through too much damage. It doesn't have to hit like exactly Force of Vigor, the card that's stopping you from that you need to draw to win the game. So my opponent remains at 20 life despite taking all this damage. I draw Crypt, and now I'm quite happy because there's no anger shenanigans that can ever do anything anymore. I was mostly covered with Relic, but you know, they could have forced me to pop Relic and then done some sort of anger, Hollow One, win the game combo. Yep, I continue to send. My hand is blanks except for Incinerate, which is, you know, 3 damage. So it shaves a turn off the clock maybe at some point. My opponent continues to not be able to do anything. And I think at some point they just scooped because they realized that they were actually dead. I pointed out to them, we discussed it in the game, and I said, I don't think you have any outs. But I think I just wanted to, you know, just in case we're playing for top 8, maybe they forgot about a card or they missed it on the deck list. But I think, yeah, I had to fade Lightning Axe and Force of Vigor in this game. So now I do a 5 blast, so now the next turn is actually lethal, because this is 4, 5, 6, 7 damage on top of what I attack with, and they finally run out of food, and then my opponent scoops, and I was like, fantastic. What a wild game. Double Time Twister, lock my opponent under Blood Moon, they never draw Force of Vigor despite drawing, you know, 20 plus extra cards, something ridiculous like that. It was quite fascinating. I really enjoyed this game, even though I think I got very lucky in multiple points to win. And maybe made a mistake with the Time Twister, but that's something I will go back to thinking about. Certainly, if you're enjoying the deck, you can make a few decisions. There are some sweet new cards from Modern Horizons that are phenomenal. You get the sick angle of Hull Breacher plus Time Twister. It served me pretty well playing through the rounds at the moment. I'm currently 8-1. I have one more match as the play into the top 8. If you have any thoughts or questions, you can feel free to message me either on Discord or just post in the Aggro channel on Discord, and I'm sure I'll see your message and respond to it. Awesome. Good luck everyone for the rest of the tournament.